Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Empowering Minds Mental Health Podcast. Today, we are joined by Simone. Simone is an Army veteran and the author of PTSD and What Helped Me. She's been very open about her own experiences with trauma and PTSD and now spends time helping others to understand that healing is possible and that people aren't alone in their journey. So, Simone, again, I am so happy that you agreed to come on today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and just to share the message that people with PTSD are not alone and
Hmm.
that there's so many things that can cause PTSD outside of combat trauma. This
Hmm.
message is important and needs to be spread worldwide. So thank you for having
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your service. So,
Thank
for
you.
those who may not be familiar with your story yet, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to start speaking out about PTSD and the things that have helped you along the way?
Sure. So my journey, I want to state, has been a long one. The from going from trauma to speaking out and being an advocate is
Hmm.
not an overnight process or even a few years.
Hmm.
But when I was in the military, very quick into my service, I was sexually assaulted by another soldier, and it led to not only physical trauma, it led to a traumatic brain injury, and it led to me having PTSD, but that went undiagnosed for about 10 years. So that one incident, because it wasn't properly handled, I didn't get the right medical care or mental health care. It really snowballed into 10 years of desperation, and a lot of choices that I made were self-medicating, and I didn't know why. I thought I was just living my life, but I was really self-medicating from a trauma that I blocked out of my memory and pretended like it didn't happen. But my whole life was obvious once I finally went to therapy, that okay, your whole life has been um, centered around trying to forget this trauma.
Hmm.
So, about 20 years later, now I'm on my healing journey where I want to give back and I want to speak out because 20 years ago, it wasn't talked about, military sexual trauma. And I believe that the more that we do talk about things that have happened to us, and especially now in this climate of talking about the files and sexual assault and trafficking, it's so important to keep this conversation and this momentum going so that the survivor's voice is so strong and everybody is made aware of it that listen, this happens to almost everyone. It's much more than 1 in 3 women. That's what 1 in 3 women report,
Hmm.
and 1 in 4 men report. But there's some people that probably don't even feel comfortable talking about it or reporting. So it happens to, if it hasn't happened to a family member, it's probably happened to a friend of yours or somebody that
Hmm.
maybe has kept it to themselves. So why I speak out is that my goal is so that predators don't have a safe space, that we're all talking about it. And right away, if uncomfortable behavior or something happens, we don't allow years to go by to seek justice or find our own healing.
Hmm.
And that's another reason that I felt so compelled to write my book and my workbook, is that it really doesn't have to take 20 years for somebody to have, after trauma, severe trauma, it doesn't have to take them that long to live a healthy, happy, fulfilling life.
Hmm.
So I kind of combined all the things that I'd learned over my long healing journey and put them in one easy, simple, short book, to help other survivors with PTSD to maybe make their healing journey not as long and a little bit quicker. So
Hmm.
because it's 2026, we have so
Hmm.
much resources available that even if you can't afford adequate health care, there's a lot of self-help out there that can really, like your podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, being mentally health aware is very important.
Mm-hmm.
So, and doesn't cost anything nowadays.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Oh,
yes.
wow. I'm listening to your story. It caught me off guard just a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
one, not in a bad way,
Yeah. Yeah.
but one, I want to thank you for sharing your story.
Mm-hmm.
Two, I want to thank you for being a voice. See, I have my Veterans Peer Support certification,
Okay.
and I personally know like family and close friends who um, deal with PTSD. And you mentioned about therapy, and that's something I'm real big on because there's so many stigmas around therapy or tapping into resources that can help you. So I'm so glad that you highlighted, yes, this happened, but yes, I went to therapy because I find that people will kind of like suffer in silence sometimes. They know the help is there, but because of stigmas, it's kind of like they might be a little bit embarrassed about
Yeah.
getting help. So I'm glad that you highlighted
Oh,
therapy.
yeah.
That's actually a good thing.
It is, but what I like to talk about too is that it's not only just therapy. We talk about therapy as a main form of healing for PTSD, but it really, if you're not ready for therapy, you can take other steps because
Mhm,
PTSD is not just mental. And this is a subject I like to talk about is that it's physical and spiritual. It can be
mhm,
financial and it can be social. So until you attack all those aspects in your life on PTSD, just going to therapy isn't going to be enough.
mhm,
And my book highlights all kinds of the physical, the emotional, the financial, the ways that you can start your healing journey. Because if you're not ready to talk about it in therapy, listen, you are making a bigger deal of what it is. Okay, avoiding it, and it's really not going to be a bigger deal once you finally talk about it.
mhm,
There's always somebody that's been through a lot worse, but we're not comparing trauma, but it's really what's big is that you're putting it off, is that you're making it bigger, and you're
yeah,
letting it take up the rest of your life.
mhm,
When okay, it took up 20 years of my life. I wasn't going to let it take the next 20. Okay,
mhm,
but if I didn't confront it and talk about it, it would. So it's really, once you get into journaling or once you get into a
mhm,
physical exercise program,
mhm,
that's making your body stronger. And then maybe you are ready to go to therapy,
mhm,
or you get into therapy and you're mentally stronger. And then you start, going to exercise classes and things. So it's a whole total health approach that you have to take with PTSD because PTSD is very serious and
yeah,
it attacks just, way more than a mental thing.
yes,
Um,
yes, I
so
agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So just to continue on a little bit more about PTSD, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people hear the term PTSD, but they really don't understand what it looks like in everyday life. So, from your experience, what are some things you wish more people understood about PTSD?
So post-traumatic stress disorder, there's another term that's been floating around as post-traumatic stress injury. And I relate to that a lot more, where
Mhm,
it's an injury, it's happened to you. It's not a a problem. It's not a disorder you were born with. And it's something that you can um, really combat if you're
mhm,
taking your health, into your own hands and make that decision that I'm not going to let it run my life anymore. So it's an injury and it's a normal reaction. There's nothing we have to be ashamed about. We have severe trauma, and even if witnessing trauma, right? You don't have to go overseas to witness gun violence and be a victim to gun violence. So there's combat in American streets we're not talking about.
Mhm.
So what's the shame in that? There's no shame when you're a victim and there's things out of our control that has happened that has been severely traumatizing, but what is in our control is how we can be healthier after that trauma, and your body protecting yourself uh, with hypervigilance and with,
Mhm.
maybe isolation. Or you could even start seeking adrenaline seeking behaviors after severe trauma. You could maybe start to be really outgoing and the life of the party. You could be covering up, your internal pain. There's all kinds of ways that humans, can mask the trauma that they're dealing with. So, that's your body trying to heal itself, trying to avoid the memories, trying to not bring you around that part of town because you don't, or bring you around certain situations because you don't
Mhm.
want the trauma to happen again. And that's completely normal. PTSD is a normal behavior to severe trauma. But when it starts to, like I said, take 20 years out of your life and
Mhm.
impact, you are avoiding these conversations in your head, or you're having them come up, you're having flashbacks where you are not living a happy, healthy life. That's the issue, is that,
Mhm.
yes, you went through trauma, but it doesn't have to run the rest of your life. So, there's, like I said, there's many, many different approaches um, to healing from PTSD. And it doesn't have to be, a lifelong issue. So that's the hope and message I want to send to people, is that PTSD is treatable.
Mhm. You mentioned earlier about sometimes people they might not quite be ready for therapy yet, which is true. I see that a lot too.
Sure.
So for you, what helped you to begin moving towards like your healing process where you finally got to the point like I need some therapy in addition to, you know, other things to help me.
Yeah, so exercise after the military was always my go-to, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge part of my life, and even
Mm-hmm.
martial arts. I have a whole chapter dedicated to martial arts, where that was a lifesaver for me.
Mm-hmm.
But really, what happened on my situation when I started to even I didn't even know I had PTSD, right? So I went to a vet center. I was married to a Army combat veteran,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd heard that PTSD is from combat. So, living with somebody with PTSD can be very challenging. And I
Mm-hmm.
went to the vet center um, as a wife, looking for ways that I could help my husband with his PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And then the counselor, God bless her so much. She changed my life. Shout out to the vet centers. But she said, I don't want to talk about his military service. I want to talk about yours. And we were, ended up talking about that. Oh, your sexual assault caused your PTSD. You have PTSD. And so this was, just such a huge relief to me to find
Mm-hmm.
out why I'd been, dealing with the things I've been dealing with, and why I even chose the partner that I did, somebody else with
Mm-hmm.
PTSD and dysfunction, if I was healed from my PTSD, I probably wouldn't have chosen another person that had the same traumas, but they call it like a trauma bond.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that's what started me on my healing. It's like, no, you can't force anybody that you're living with, even that you care with, to get help. But you can deal with your own trauma, and you can deal with, what you have control over.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started learning about sexual assault PTSD and military sexual trauma. And I didn't see a lot of voices out in the media about it. So again, me not if to leave a better life, a better world for my kids and others that I don't want this to happen to. That's why I chose to start speaking out as part of my healing journey, and to hope that the more knowledge gets out there, people will realize, okay, PTSD can happen from sexual assault too. So, yeah,
I'm glad you highlighted that because actually, my own misconception about PTSD was combat because my
yeah,
personal experience, people who went through, that's what they went through. So later on, I started reading some different articles and stuff around what you're talking about, sexual assault, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is considered as a trauma. But to me, it didn't sound like it was highlighted. It was more of like the combat side. And so,
yeah.
yeah, that is a common misconception.
And I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial here, but I speak my truth,
Hmm.
and I believe why combat veteran PTSD is more highlighted is got a nationalism, lining to it, where
Hmm.
the country, um, uh, you know, wants to make more people soldiers, and that it's a great honor to even get PT, to go to war, and have these things happen, and that, okay, we honor our soldiers, they sacrifice their life, not only their mental health, that's a huge
Hmm.
thing. But again, in a whole country of Americans, there's combat in our streets. Okay, we don't have to go overseas. So what's the difference between there's no difference between bullets, right?
Of
It's
course.
trauma. It's a form of combat, and I feel that American citizens didn't sign up to go to war. That's
Hmm.
the difference in my eyes, is that as a soldier, you do sign up knowing that certain things will happen, but I want to find solutions for all PTSD, because again,
Hmm.
living with a combat veteran, and my PTSD, we had very similar coping mechanisms.
Hmm.
The trauma, it didn't matter what the trauma was. We were both dealing with PTSD almost the same way. And that
Hmm.
was the thing too, that, okay, combat overseas, or, in your home from domestic violence,
Hmm.
you're going to have the flashbacks, trouble sleeping, problems eating,
Hmm.
it's all very similar how your body reacts to it. So if there's help for combat veterans, then there's help for sexual assault survivors as well. Um, so yeah, I feel that the message needs to be out there more, so
Hmm.
that people affected can get help.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so, I'm sorry, having trouble seeing with and without my glasses today, but I wanted to talk
Fine.
a little bit around advocacy because your work, I mean, your book, your speaking engagements, podcasts, interviews,
Mm.
this is a way to support others, like you said. So, can you share a little bit about the work that you're doing today and how people can connect with you to learn more?
Of course. So I can be found on my website, PTSD and whathelpedme.com. I have just started coaching clients with PTSD. So that has been a great honor of mine to work with PTSD survivors. And also, all my social media is the same. Yeah, I'd love anybody to reach out to me. Like I said, my website's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Um, but yeah, I put myself out there, so it, because really my story isn't unique.
Hmm.
There's so many other people that, in my journey. This is why I've opened, new avenues in my business, more than just, the nonprofit work, and more than speaking out, because there's a need for other survivors to connect, survivor sisters. And so it's been a really rewarding process to meet other survivors and people share their story.
Mhm. Okay. So my last question for you, um, if someone is struggling with trauma or PTSD, what one message would you like to highlight to them?
Yes, so PTSD is treatable. That is my slogan, and I stand by that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I like to add that it's it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to take the rest of your life. It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
take up more than it already did. So you're not alone. I have been there. I have made it out to the other side, and everybody can do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It feels alone, but you're not, because, like I said, the military sexual trauma that are reported, I feel, is underreported. It's a big issue. It's a huge issue, and even civilian sexual assault is those numbers are even higher. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no shame in saying that you need help. That's strength in my book, is when you actually say, "Hey, I'm going to do something about this. I want to be healthier, and
Mm-hmm.
I need help to do that."
Mm-hmm.
Um, because yeah, PTSD can be isolating, but it shouldn't have to be, because we all understand that, this, like I said, it's a very common thing.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but
So,
hopefully, still, the more we talk, it won't be, right.
right. Yeah.
That
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, we're moving forward here.
Absolutely. So,
Yes.
a couple of times you've mentioned your book and your workbook. So, when you do coaching, is that when you use the workbook as part of your coaching?
So I have a different program, but
Okay.
I do work with the book, and the workbook is self-help. So that's for
Okay.
people who, just need an affordable resource and a place to
Mm-hmm.
start. I have a complete list of PTSD therapies. So, and really, there's no other list out there like this. This is why I made it, because I couldn't believe, when you search for PTSD help online, you think everything would come up, but it's very, business specific, so one
Mm-hmm.
business model. But I've, been working at this for 20 years. So I have a complete list, and people can find what therapy they want to try.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, my coaching is more individualized and
Gotcha.
very, very specific. Hmm.
Okay. Would you mind sharing your book information, where it's
Sure.
sold? You want people to go to your website. I really want people to purchase your book too.
Thank you. Yeah. So the book and workbook is on Amazon. There's a link right on my website. Like I said, www.ptsd and whathelpedme.com, all
Mm-hmm.
spelled out. And the workbook is a journal, and it goes along with every chapter of the book. So when you're reading the book, you can go to the workbook and journal what what's related to that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a memoir. My book is not a memoir. I want to make that distinction too, because
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot of books out there from survivors that are self-help. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
are, memoirs and personal stories, but I didn't want people to be overwhelmed um, and depressed about hearing my story. I wanted to just offer solutions, and that's really
Gotcha.
what the book is about, is complete list of solutions, and a little bit of my commentary on what has helped me and what hasn't. So it's a very simple and easy to read. quick read type thing, so
Okay.
people can uh, quickly find solutions.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. So, if you have any other resonating thoughts you want to leave, that's fine. And
Uh,
if not, then I can
well,
reach
just
back out to you.
yeah. No, we just we covered that PTSD is
Hmm.
treatable. That and that there's sister survivors out there. Um, so there's no need to feel alone.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you again um, for agreeing to come on. The name of my podcast is very strategic, the Empowering Minds Mental Health Podcast. So I'm very selective about who I invite onto the podcast because I want them to help me empower minds, inspire someone else, encourage someone else. You never know like who's listening, and this video today might be the very thing that helps them to say, okay, well, let me take step A, and then I'm going to go into therapy or whatever their
Yeah.
self-care plan looks like towards their mental wellness. So I thank you for that. It's education around stigmas, and I thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
That's good.
Thank
I'll be
you.
in contact with you a little bit later today.
All right. Thank you
All right,
so
take
much.
care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.